If we've learned anything over the past few years, it is that price and affordability are not the same thing. In the next few minutes, I'm going to be giving you a system that you can actually rely on to calculate your home affordability. Now, this will work whether it be a condo, a townhouse, or a detached single-family home. You will know the exact price range you should be buying at and not what the realtor will tell you to buy at. Look, I'm a realtor too, but I'm not here to hype you up. I'm here to give you the information that you will need. Now, when it comes to purchasing a home anywhere or any kind of asset for investment, there are three things you need to look at. First of all, you need to look at what we call the MCP. Now, the MCP is your monthly comfort payment. So this is the amount of money you need to have set aside every month to live a comfortable life. Granted, comfort has become somewhat of an illusion lately in the last few years, but that's only because people are buying well above their means. Moving on, the next concept you need to learn about is the C2C. C2C is what we call the cash to close. So that includes everything from the down payment, the property taxes, land transfer taxes, closing costs, moving costs, and the initial setup of your new home. And finally, we have your risk buffer. If we've learned anything over the past few years, it is that life can be pretty risky. Now, what you don't want to do is end up taking on this investment and then going from that into the worst time of your life. Now, in a typical real estate transaction where you're going to be getting a mortgage, what you're typically looking at is a bank versus you battle. So when it comes down to the bank's going to want to give you the most amount of money possible. Now, here's something people don't know about the banking system. So I used to be a financial advisor. In fact, I was licensed between the years of 2012 to 2014 as a financial advisor, and I can confidently tell you, if the bank could give you the money, it would. With that said, the bank wants to give you the maximum allowable amount of money possible for you, because the more they give, the more they make on the interest when it comes back in. Now, when it comes to you, what you want to do is something that we call sustainable. You want to be able to sustain this over the next 25, 30, if you're planning on going into longer mortgages, which typically aren't recommended, 40 plus years. So what we typically get as realtors is people come to us with what they think, at least at the time, is a pre-approval, a PA, right? And they come to us with that pre-approval and they say, oh, I'm pre-approved for, let's say, $1 million. Now, first of all, have you gone into the bank and actually had your paperwork done? If you have, then what you have is a pre-approval. Otherwise, if you did that 1-minute online test, you probably are not pre-approved. In fact, you will probably be among the unlucky few that tend to have their deal fall through because they didn't receive true pre-approval. So what happens when the bank gives you a pre-approval online is what they're telling you is, if everything checks out and we feel like it, we'll be giving you this amount. But the reality of it is that sometimes things change. And if you go into a bank or go to a mortgage broker and you get an actual pre-approval where they will sit down and do the underwriting for you, it'll take some time, but they will give you a true pre-approval that you will qualify for the next 4 months. So for the next 4 months, you are qualified for this amount, which gives you plenty of time to look for a home. Now again, we can make a whole video about pre-approvals and how mortgage systems work, but a pre-approval itself is a very, very beautiful tool. However, it is always important to remember that the pre-approval is always your max. And it does not mean you should be buying at this price. If you want to live comfortably and not be house poor, you might want to reconsider that. Now, just to give you some background on how you actually get this pre-approval, there are two ratios that your bank uses. They're called TDS, which stands for total debt service, and then you have GDS, which stands for gross debt service. Now, the difference between these is pretty straightforward, pretty simple, and the easiest way to put it is the TDS is basically your gross debt service, so gross income, whatever the amount you get in income pre-tax, plus some. So you add things on top of that, and that will give you your total debt service. Now, typically, you don't want these numbers to be high, of course, logically. But the number we want to look at will be total debt service, because at your total debt service, we can actually tell whether or not you can afford the home and the lifestyle. Now, the bank doesn't care, right? And at the end of the day, like I mentioned, they want to give you the maximum amount of possible. So what they will look at usually is your gross debt service, because that indicates the maximum amount of money they can give you, so that they can get the maximum amount of return from you. Now again, if you live in Canada, we are better at giving mortgages than the US is, which is why we were able to dodge the 2008 financial crisis, because our banks aren't that, let's say, lazy. However, the banks do tend to still give out money pretty easily, especially if you're qualified. Now, what are payments that go into your total debt service? So let's talk about certain payments you might have. So of course, you have your car payments, right? You have your credit cards, you have your lines of credit, you have your student loans, right? If you are of the unlucky few, you might have child payments, you might have alimony, and generally any other debt you may have, right? That goes into your total debt service, which is the number you should be looking at to understand the comfort level you can expect to live at. So in a nutshell, it becomes a question of how much of your income can go to your house and how much of your income can go to your house plus your other debts. So the way we are going to calculate how much you can afford is you're going to start off with your income. We're going to go very quickly into your limits. So whatever the bank gives you as your pre-approval number, right? So whatever max amount you can buy. And then we're going to calculate the maximum amount of money you need to live, your housing max. We're going to combine with that your mortgage payment, and that will give us our answer, i.e. the purchase price you're looking to pay to actually make sure you live a comfortable life. Now keep in mind, debt competing with your mortgage is basically another gas competing for oxygen in your lungs. You only have so much capacity you can go with, and going beyond it, sure, at times might make you feel euphoric, but it's not going to end well for you at all. Now, when it comes to your house payments or whatever payments you make towards your house, there are a few factors you need to look at. So for example, if you're buying a condo versus a freehold property. Now, the easiest way to explain the difference between the relationship of a condo and a freehold is, do you own rights to the land? If you live in a condo, most likely you do not, and you pay maintenance fees. Now, this doesn't mean that every place you pay maintenance fees or road fees is a condo. You could still have a freehold where you have to pay road fees for maybe a private road in the neighborhood or something of that sort. Now, those fees tend to be very cheap, within the range of $100, $120 a month. However, when it comes to maintenance fees, they tend to be fairly high, starting in the 400 range, going all the way up to the thousands. We've seen them get very close to the $2,000 range. And again, that is monthly. But again, going back to your house maximum, we can see here, for example, you got to include your mortgage into it. You have your property tax, you have your lease payments, anything you're renting out. You have your utilities, so you have your heat, you have your electricity, and you have your water. These tend to run people for more than they expect. Again, it's important to know the kind of pricing you have in the area you're looking to buy, because they are basically an added monthly payment that you can't really run away from, unless you're okay with living without heat, water, and electricity. Furthermore, you have your condo fees. So again, if you live in a condo, crucial if you have road fees potentially even. And then something people forget but is gladly very cheap, it is the insurance prices, right? So you need to have your home insured, you need to have your car insured, you need to have everything insured. And then finally, we have the amount you need to maintain your life. So if one day you lose a tire, well, you don't have to lose much more than that. With that said, these typically encompass most people's monthly payments that go into the house on top of the mortgage. Now here I know what some people are going to be thinking. Well, why don't I just rent? Look, there's a lot of fees associated with ownership, and with rental, I could just have a maximum monthly payment and I don't have to care about all of that. And that is a case to be made. That is why you typically get the question is, should I rent, should I buy? Now that is a very complex discussion, and again, it depends on where you are in your life, what kind of goals you have for your life, what kind of investment abilities you have in your life. If you'd rather put your money in the stock market and have it there, you could do that. If you'd rather have your money in a housing market that seems to double every few years, you can also have it in there. So to make this more understandable, let's go through an example together, okay? So now let's look at a case we've been seeing quite frequently. So this family has a household income of, usually we're getting something around 140K. Now this family right here has an average monthly payment of around $500. Let's say it's for the car. So the car is around $500 monthly. The place they're looking to buy is a condo, and their estimated condo fees are, let's say they have a really good realtor like myself, and they get one that has low condo fees looking at around $600. And then for the condo, funny enough, despite not owning the land you are on, you still have to pay property tax, and let's say their property tax is somewhere within the range. Again, if they're looking at this size of condo with these kinds of fees, it's probably going to be similar to the condo fees, so around I'm going to go with $400 to $600, but let's say $400 just to make the example believable. For heat, utilities, because they're paying condo fees, odds are they're only paying for one utility. So let's say they're paying for electricity or heat or hydro, and that is going to be around $100 a month. They do a great job of maintaining their electrical usage, so they're paying pretty cheap. Now, when it comes to the mortgage, let's say they got it at an interest rate of 5%, just to make the numbers easy. Now, granted, people are getting lower than this now. We are sitting around the 4% range, but for the sake of example and not knowing where rates could go, let's do a 5%. And it is a 25-year mortgage. And then let's say their down payment was something quite considerable, so let's say around $80K. Now, if you're following along and taking this example for yourself, just include whatever numbers you have here, and let's get started. So if their household income is around 140K, they're probably doing 666K per month. And if we are to follow the bank's equation, they would calculate their housing max, for example, at, let's say, 39% of that, which means that their monthly maximum allowable payment per month is somewhere in the realm of $4,500 a month, which basically means that they should expect to pay this amount on their loans maximum per month if they want to live a comfortable life. Because let's not forget, this 140K right here was before taxes, and taxes tend to eat away a lot of your income. So now we have the $4,550 figure, and again, this is because we're taking their gross income before tax, so taxes will eat away at a good chunk of that. But given everything we know, we're taking 39% of that, which is going to sit us around $4,550. And now let's start pulling back the numbers. Now, the way this typically works is you take out half of your condo fees, you take out your property taxes, and you take out your heating. Because again, these are all payments that will be going to the house that you will be, or the home you will be buying. So if we do half of that, we're looking in the range of 300. So it's going to be 300 plus 400 plus 100 will set us at an even 800. And now we're going to take 800 out of the 4,550, which will leave us in the realm of $3,750. Now, ideally, this is what they want to pay towards their mortgage. Now, let's say they're living in a place where the mortgage rate, again, is 5%. Now, at a 5% rate, the typical rule of thumb, and why I chose 5% is because to make this easier, you can always make the calculation depending on whatever mortgage rates we're sitting at right now. But at a 5% mortgage rate, typically 100K of mortgage will cost you $585 a month. So taking this into account, and again, I can give you an updated rate, just comment on whatever rate you have and it'll help get you a better number. But at this upgraded amount, so we're going to be looking at this divided by this, so 3,750 divided by 585 equals, I think, 6.4. And then we're going to take this 6.4 figure and we're going to take that right here. And we are going to go 6.4 times $100,000, which gives us very quickly $640K. So if your annual household income is $140K, the maximum house you should be buying is sitting in the realm of $640K. And that is at a 5% interest rate. Now, as rates go down, you can go higher. But again, this is the ceiling. This is not the minimum you should be paying for. This is the maximum. And now what you don't want to do in this scenario is look at all these numbers and say to yourself, hey, I could probably get to the low 700s. No, you can't, and you shouldn't, and it's going to hurt you, and it's going to suck. And trust me, you are going to regret it. We've seen it time and time again. We do our best, but sometimes people want what they want. Now, given the 640K numbers, let's talk about what can kill your approval rating. So when you're trying to get that mortgage and you want to get that approval, make sure you qualify. Granted, if you follow these rules, you will qualify and you will be fine. But if you're trying to do it, typically there are three major factors that will destroy your pre-approval chances or your general approval chances. So the biggest contender tends to be car payments. Now, what I like to recommend for my clients is make sure you've bought your car outright if you can. Car payments tend to be very high interest relative to housing. So if you can figure out a way to get your car paid off, it's a good way to get out of debt. And this is something I used to do when I worked as a financial advisor. A good deal of my work was in debt planning. So when you wanted to plan to get out of debt, it's actually fairly complex. But what you want to do is you want to focus on your higher debt loans, get rid of those, and then just go down the chain. So typically your mortgage is your lowest debt loan because, again, government subsidies and all that fun. But yes, you want to go to the highest debt loans, pay those off in bulk as much as you can, and just bring your interest rates down as much as possible. Now, the second mortgage approval killers that people tend to forget about are condo fees. The bank does look at them, and they do get included. So if you are buying a condo, and let's say the condo fees are $500, that is $500 a month, which is pretty low, by the way. That is immediately $500 a month off your maximum, because that's what they'll take into account. Now, something to take into account for yourself, condo fees never go down. I've not once seen that happen in my many years of experience. You will not see condo fees go down. It is virtually impossible. Now, technically it is possible, but it doesn't work like that. It's never worked like that in practice, and I don't believe it ever will. And then finally, you have your revolving debt. Now, these are usually credit cards, but you want to make sure you have those paid off. Again, their rate is like in 20% annually, so you want to do your best to not have credit card loans because these are much worse than anything you can have on that front. And as you can tell from what we're doing here, is the easiest way to increase affordability isn't some kind of magic system you follow. It's just get rid of your debts, increase the amount of payments you can make, and you're good to go. Now, with that said, let's look at the biggest two types of properties. So you have the condo, and then you have the freehold, which I'm just going to make FH. Now, when it comes to these kinds of properties, one is not better than the other. The answer is it depends. However, the major factor tends to be that same price does not mean the same cost. So like we mentioned for condos, let's say a condo fee of $600 a month. Now again, condo fees do have a lot of benefits to them. It's not just negatives. You do have access to party rooms, game rooms, pools, barbecues, park areas, whatever they might be. So there are certain amenities that do go into your $600 a month condo fee, which would probably cost you just as much if you owned your own property to do. Whereas if you own your own property, it's very expensive to have your own pool. A condo, you're already kind of paying for that. So the pro tends to be that typically when you buy real estate, you need to have a maintenance reserve, so money set aside in case, oops, right? In this, you do not need a lot of money, maintenance reserve, right? Because most of that is covered by your maintenance fees, which are the condo fees. And then when it comes to utilities, usually only electricity, they tend to also be low as well. Now, let's look at freehold. When it comes to freehold, there are no condo fees. You're doing great, right? Nothing to pay a month. Especially if you don't have road fees, you're good to go. Now, some places do have road fees, but we're going to ignore those for now and treat this like a detached property. However, if you're looking at maintenance reserves, what I've seen personally through home ownership, because I do own a home myself, a house, is your maintenance fees could be reasonably high. Now, if you do insure everything, these do tend to drop quite considerably, but you are looking in the range of, let's say, $250 a month, at least, which is what I've kind of been looking at myself. And that is just to make sure that if something goes wrong, you're good, you're safe, and you don't need to freeze through the winter. And then finally, when it comes to utilities, right here, these guys, you're going to be paying quite considerably higher, usually 3 to 4 times, because depending on where you live, electricity might not be that high of a payment. Usually it tends to be something like water. Now, gas is typically a lower, cheaper payment, so you shouldn't have a lot of damage on that front. But when it comes to your water bill, which sometimes if you're in a condo you don't need to pay, that tends to be much higher. So we're going to say, compared to this, it's going to be at least, let's say, 3 multiples, making it high. Now, let's say if you own your own place, your maintenance is like $50 a month. I don't know, changing light bulbs, doing like chandelier goes wacky, whatever you might need to do. And then your utilities, let's say they're around $100 a month, which is fairly reasonable. Whereas when it comes to home ownership, we already have the $250 here. And your utilities, for example, myself right now, I pay around $400 a month in utilities. I just realized I need to start saving some power. Now, when you look at the final number, you have the 600 plus the 50 plus the 100. You're sitting around $750 a month. added payments. And now when you're looking at these, you're looking at 250 plus 400, which sets you around 650. Now, at 650 versus 750, you're not exactly saving a lot of money, which is my point when it comes to condo ownership versus freehold. And again, very, very easily, could you have a road fee of $100, and that $100 immediately takes this to 750, and now you basically are paying the exact same you would pay for a similarly priced condo. So it isn't always a calculation of, oh, condos are more expensive, freeholds are always better. No, it depends and it will vary, and it's very, very, very situation specific. Now, to begin to wrap things up when it comes to affordability, there are two things you need to look at. You need to look at what your safe range is, and then you need to look at your ceiling. The easiest way to set this is your safe range is where you're living comfortably, right? So if your aim is comfort, you stick to your safe range. If you're okay with the occasional anxiety attack and panic attacks and not being able to sleep at night, this is when you go towards your ceiling. Now, never, no one will ever recommend you try to get to your ceiling. It is a terrible idea. However, it tends to happen, and given where the economy is, a lot of people are reaching their ceilings and even surpassing it. But when you surpass it, you risk foreclosure. And if you foreclose, you lose the house, and it all goes downhill from there. Now again, like I mentioned, this is because I come from a background of financial advising and working in the consulting space. And I can tell you that sometimes if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And maybe, just maybe, if you actually took care of your finances, you would be in a much better position. Now I know, a lot of people out there are going to say, look, I make 150K a year. I think I can afford $1 million home. Technically, can you afford the payments? Yes. However, life tends to come at you very, very quickly and very hard. And when it does, what you don't want to do is you don't want to be panicking. And you don't want to be freaking out, losing sleep and stressing, then eventually getting sick, and then ending it from there. So take it from your friendly neighborhood realtor. What the bank allows you to borrow is not what you should be borrowing. Now, if you have any questions about your specific situation, my number is available in my bio. You can feel free to message me, text me, WhatsApp. Otherwise, have a wonderful day.